I want to talk a little bit about how stress and inflammation can distort thyroid signaling even further, including a hormone that most people have never heard of that actually blocks thyroid action entirely. And this is where people who feel like they're doing everything right and still feel like they're going backwards. And once you understand this particular layer, the confusion will lift a little bit. And this is the point where a lot of people are going to feel like they're losing their mind. They have symptoms that are unmistakable, fatigue that doesn't resolve, cold hands, cold feet. They have weight gain that doesn't respond to effort, brain fog, low motivation, and yet they're told again and again, your labs are normal. And this is where we need to get very precise because normal blood work does not equal healthy tissue. Blood tests measure what's floating around in circulation. They do not measure what's happening inside the cells. And thyroid hormones only matter once they enter the cell. And they bind to the receptor and they activate energy production. Everything before that is just logistics. Here's a simple way to think about it. You can have trucks full of supplies sitting outside a factory. If the doors are locked, the workers are on strike, or the machinery's broken, nothing's going to get produced. From the outside, it's going to look like everything's fine, but inside, nothing is working. And that is exactly how thyroid dysfunction hides. You can have normal TSH, normal free T4, even normal free T3. Well, your cells functionally hypothyroid. Why? Because hormone action is influenced by inflammation, stress chemistry, and receptor sensitivity. And this is where a hormone called reverse T3 comes in. Most people never even heard of it. Reverse T3 is a mirror image version of T3. It looks very similar, but it does nothing really useful. In fact, it blocks thyroid receptors. Think of it like putting the wrong key into a lock. The door stays closed. You're not getting in. Under conditions of chronic stress, inflammation, calorie restriction, illness, or overtraining, the body intentionally makes more reverse T3. And that's not a mistake. It's not being sick. It's a survival strategy. The body is trying to slow things down to conserve energy. The problem is that in modern life, the stress never resolves. So that brake stays on. And that's why people can feel deeply hypothyroid even when their blood work looks perfectly acceptable. The system is protecting itself, not optimizing performance. Now let's talk about goiters and goitrogens. An enlarged thyroid is often treated as proof that something is wrong. But enlargement is frequently a sign that the thyroid is working harder, not failing. It's growing tissue to capture more iodine. And again, that's an adaptation, not a disease. Similarly, foods like broccoli, kale, cauliflower, and cabbage have been villainized for years. They're called goitrogens. Here's the truth. Those foods don't damage the thyroid. They temporarily compete with iodine for binding sites. So if iodine intake is adequate, this is a non-issue. If iodine is deficient, it becomes a problem. The food isn't the enemy. The deficiency is the enemy. This is a recurring theme in physiology. The body rarely breaks randomly. It responds logically to what it has access to. Let's talk about autoimmunity for a second, because this is where fear often escalates. When thyroid tissue is damaged, whether by chemical irritation, inflammation, or nutrient imbalance, the immune system responds. That response is supposed to be temporary. But when the trigger doesn't go away, the cleanup crew never leaves the building. Over time, antibodies can form. And that's how conditions like Hashimoto's develop. Not because the immune system suddenly turned on the body. It's because the tissue damage created an ongoing signal. And this is very important, so let me be extremely clear. Autoimmune thyroid conditions are not permanent sentences. They are adaptive responses that absolutely can be downregulated. But again, the longer the system has been in that state, the more layers are involved. This is why simply adding or increasing medication rarely solves the problem. It may improve lab numbers. It may even reduce some symptoms, but it doesn't address why conversion is impaired, why receptors are blocked, why inflammation persists, and why the immune system stays activated. That is why people feel better, but not well. And that's not a failure on their part. That's a mismatch between how complex the system is and how simplistically it's often treated. So let's bring stress into the picture as well. Not as an emotional issue, but as a biological force that directly interferes with thyroid signaling at multiple levels. This is the piece that explains why so many high performers are disproportionately affected. And that's why pushing harder is often the worst possible response. Because this is the point where everything starts to connect. Once you understand how stress interacts with the thyroid system, a lot of your confusion about thyroid is going to disappear. So let me say this clearly. Stress does not just coexist with thyroid dysfunction. Stress actively rewires thyroid signaling, and it does so at multiple levels. First, at the level of the brain. Under chronic stress, cortisol stays elevated for long periods of time. Cortisol is not a bad hormone. It keeps you alive. It helps regulate blood sugar. It mobilizes energy. But when cortisol is high all the time, your brain is going to adapt. The hypothalamus becomes less sensitive to feedback. You can think of it like a thermostat that's been exposed to heat for too long. Eventually, it's going to stop responding accurately. So even when thyroid function is low at the tissue level, the brain may not send a strong enough signal to correct it. And this is why TSH can remain normal even when thyroid function is impaired. The signal just isn't loud enough. Now, let's move to the liver, because this is where stress quietly does a lot of damage. Remember earlier when we talked about conversion? T3 has to be converted, or T4 has to be converted into T3. That conversion happens primarily in the liver and the gut. Under chronic stress, inflammation increases. Blood flow to the gut decreases. Liver detoxification capacity becomes overloaded. And when that happens, the body shifts in how it converts thyroid hormone. Instead of making active T3, it produces more of that reverse T3. Reverse T3 is inactive. Worse than that, if you remember, it blocks thyroid receptors. This is one of the most important concepts in thyroid physiology, and it's almost never explained to patients, ever. Under stress, the body intentionally puts the brakes on metabolism. Again, not because it's broken, but because it's trying to conserve resources. And this is why people under chronic stress often experience things like cold intolerance, fatigue, weight gain, slow digestion, brain fog, even when their labs look normal. The system is in energy preservation mode. And here is exactly where high performers run into trouble. Most high performers don't reduce stress when this happens. They increase effort. They train harder. They restrict calories. They push through fatigue, and they double down on discipline. That response makes sense psychologically. Physiologically, it just makes things worse because calorie restriction and overtraining both increase cortisol further. They tell the body that resources are scarce and that demand is high, so the brakes clamp down harder. And this is why aggressive dieting can actually worsen thyroid symptoms. And this is why just eat less and move more fails so spectacularly in stressed individuals. The body is not trying to lose weight. It's trying to survive.